Innovation in waste management. It's something we all take for granted. You're all consuming stuff today. You've left plates and other stuff out in the canteen or in the restaurant. What's going to happen to it? Whether for you as a consumer or for industrial waste as well. It's something we all take for granted. It just disappears off out of our sight. But look at what is happening now with plastics. I don't have to underscore just how serious this is, how damaging it is for marine life. Look what's happened with crustaceans as well. Look what's now being reported about women discovering, or the research which is being done, which shows they're getting plastic in their breast milk and in blood transfusions as well. These are really serious issues about our survivability. It's not over there anymore. We've really got to confront it. And so that's why we've invited our three guests here to talk about it. I'm going to introduce Natasha first, because as she said to me, I'm a waste nerd. I'll say that again. She confirmed she's a waste nerd. Now, I'm not sure you'll put that on your CV in future, but that's important to underscore that this is something which is of intellectual importance and challenging on so many areas. So Natasha is head of waste to value and circular economy at the Department for Business and Trade. Therefore, you are a civil servant.
Indeed, I am. Thank you very much. So yeah.
All right, I just wanted to double check this time around. Stuart Wagland, who comes from Cranfield University. Welcome, Stuart. Deputy Director of Research for the Centre for Renewable and Low Carbon Energy. And finally, Vianney Valès, who's CEO for Wastefront. You and I have talked before about this, about industrial innovation in waste management. And so I can say to you, compared to where we were 4 years ago, have you made real improvements? You deal in something no one really wants to talk about, tires. They are dirty, they are big, they are black, and they make a lot of smoke. Are things improving on tires?
Things are improving, definitely. But you mentioned out of sight. It's really out of sight, out of mind. You are saying that tires are dirty, etc. But we don't know what happens to our tires. You know, when you change a tire, you don't know. You know that you're paying £2 to dispose of it, but you don't know that our tires are actually incinerated. Billions of them worldwide are incinerated. That's what we are trying to change. We're trying to create an ecosystem around the end-of-life tires and transform them back into tires or other products.
But do you contain the waste in the smoke?
No, there's no waste, because you transform the tires into the fundamental components, okay? And that's a system where there's no waste. The energy is contained inside. There's absolutely no waste. The difficulty is then you have products that people don't know of. And then you need to create a whole new business, a whole new industry. How long does it take to convince people that what I'm producing here is great for you? You had what we call carbon black in your tires, where I have some kind of similar product to carbon black in my new process. Do you like it? How do I convince you, Mr. Tire Manufacturer, that that's what you want? That's what takes a long time.
So on if someone's got a bicycle tire, or someone's got a 2-ton tire on a tractor or something, you can't guarantee in any way that what is going to happen to it is going to be in any way sustainable.
No, we can. In our process, it's guaranteed sustainable, because basically we decompose the tire, and that tire is not made to be decomposed, because we don't want it to decompose when we're using it, so it's difficult. But because you decompose it without zero emission of CO2, because it's absence of oxygen, you just are back with the fundamental elements of the tires, the steel, the rubber, and then the carbon black, and you just need to convince your customer that's the product that they want, because it's fully sustainable, it's recycled, it's biogenic origin, it's all that, but they're not used to it because it was not there. They're so used to have the carbon black made of fossil fuel, and it works very well. And my carbon black is kind of a mixture of stuff. So I need to convince them. That's the part that really takes time. And in the last 2-3 years, we've made incredible progress in that aspect.
Are we all being irresponsible in traveling in vehicles which use tires which produce this kind of waste?
No, because so first, EVs or combustion engine cars, they both consume the same amount of tires. Everyone is trying to make a tire without rubber. It's very difficult. So the solution, and the tires manufacturers are now recognizing it, The solution is to reincorporate as much as they can recycled component in their tires. That's the way to not have tires as an environmental concern. So it needs a lot of changes from their side, and that's what's taking time. Right now, as we speak, some of our recovered carbon black, as we call it, which is slightly different than the original virgin carbon black, is being used in London EV taxis in the last 6 months. So you might have, used a taxi that's using a tire that's fully recycled without knowing it and without having paid anything more for it.
Should we get in a taxi and say, do you use recycled tires? Otherwise, I'm not traveling.
Well, I think you need to give time to time, really. I mean, everybody's pushing. The push starts from all of us. We're all the customers of our government, of our companies. We're pushing. Everything goes very slowly. And at one point, companies are realizing we need to do something. And even then, it takes time. So I think we just keep pushing and give time to time, and we'll get there.
Natasha, which brings us on to you and your assessment within government of the attitudes and whether they are changing, how they are changing, the speed at which they're changing towards waste, whether for us as private individuals or the massive amount of waste produced by many industrial processes.
Of course, I suppose I'll qualify that the waste node comments at the beginning. So it's very much, I suppose I'm a slightly newer entrant to the market. I've been doing this for just over 3.5 years, but I'm very passionate about waste and the change and the difference it can make if we do waste management right. And in my role, I support both investors and, UK businesses that have solutions for waste management. So I'm always trying to advocate for those businesses, support their projects to happen. And I take that advocacy role really seriously across government. And I talk to the Department for Environment, the Department for Transport, the Department for Energy to make sure that they all know the good work that's happening and the changes that businesses need to actually go ahead, and begin these projects. So we are seeing, exciting things happen, like with Wastefront, recycling tires. We have EV batteries. They're coming, there's more EV cars ever than on the roads, and some of those are actually coming to the end of their life. So we're going to have to recycle these EV batteries. So again, I go and talk to the Department for Environment, UKRI, all these funding mechanisms to say, actually, this is what we need for projects to happen. And there's more materials than ever, and more technologies that can be recycled and that are reaching, viability in those projects. So yes, I'm very excited to support all of that.
Is your impression, though, that the public, at whichever level we're talking, really understands that something big is happening? We've been abusing nature. We can look back to the Dasgupta report of 2 years ago, Partha Dasgupta from Cambridge University, and the impact that that had on COP26, and the fact that so many of us are now talking about nature, TNFD, and et cetera, I don't want to get geekish about this, but in other words, suddenly there's an imperative to think nature, not just about what happens inside your plant, but what happens with the waste, sewage, et cetera. Can you see a significant change in attitude?
So I suppose the Dasgupta review had a very big impact on businesses and the political world, but I think even bigger in the public was the Blue Planet, and the effect that had on people realizing that if they were discarding materials, plastics, they were ending up in our oceans.
You're talking about the television series.
Exactly, yes. So I think that had a much bigger impact on public perceptions and the weight that the public were then putting onto government and saying, actually, we want to see more recycling. And we have seen DEFRA come through with the resources and waste strategy in 2018. And there's elements of that are still being implemented. So things like extended producer responsibility to make sure that if businesses are putting packaging that's difficult to recycle on the market, they're then having to put money into the system to make sure that it is then collected and recycled. We'll soon see the deposit return scheme coming through, and the PM referenced last week something called simpler recycling to enable more households to actually participate in recycling, because public engagement is also crucial there, because we can give people the opportunity to recycle and return, those materials. But if they don't engage in those systems, say they still put their food waste and their plastics and their packaging in the residual waste bin, and that's still ending up in, things like energy from waste, because that's, recovery. But if they aren't putting it back into those recycling systems, it can't happen. So we need both, governments and businesses to come forward and create these projects and opportunities, but also the public to then engage in these systems that are being created.
But are you seeing any kind of self-generating change in mindset? In other words, people themselves saying, I've got to be more responsible on how I manage my waste?
I think potentially controversially, this is a bit of a generational thing. And anecdotally, you know, when I spoke to waste management companies, particularly during the pandemic, when a lot more young people maybe were at universities or school were at home, recycling rates went up. So maybe it was all of these, you know, children and teenagers pointing out to their parents and saying, you know, you need to start putting this in this bin. It's, you know, not good enough. So yeah, I think there is definitely a change in perception, but then, you know, we've seen in other panel sessions, there is competition between wanting to do the right thing and then the cost of living, you know, so if it is more expensive to do something, it is harder. And I think the situation we're in now is sort of diverting people's attention.
But when I quote that kind of evidence of what the impact of plastics is in water now, do you think the average person out there really has the first clue when they're buying a bit of fish, when they're maybe not mussels and oysters, but they need to realize the impact on mothers as well with breast milk?
I would say probably not. And I would say even personally, it's difficult to comprehend just the size of the problem that we're trying to address. You know, even the Pacific garbage patch, you know, that's infinitely bigger than we could even conceive. You know, it's bigger than whole countries. So yeah, I really don't think that day to day, it's not something that comes to mind. And that's why, you know, it is important that government has a hand in driving behaviors like with the deposit return scheme. If you have to put money into the system, you're paying an extra, you know, 20, 30p for your bottle, and then you get that back. That means that you will be doing this, you know, more likely. You can't guarantee 100%, but it means there's, you know, the government has a role in encouraging this good behavior.
Well, Stuart, what does the data tell you about how things are changing and whether we're way behind the curve and things are moving much faster than really the public is aware of what's happening?
Yeah, I would agree with many of the points that Natasha made. In fact, Natasha, you said quite a few things I was going to say, such as Blue Planet. I was going to mention that as a big driver in the public. So I think people are aware of the need to do better and they want to do better, but they just don't know how.
But are they aware of the scale of the challenge?
No, no way. I don't believe the general public are aware of the scale. And I think everyone thinks it's somebody else's problem to pick up. And that's a major challenge that I think in the industry we have to face. But we want to recycle more, we want to recover more material from our waste, but it's about people putting the right thing in the bin, making the right decision on what products they buy, buying the right amount of products. So if you buy too much food, increase food waste, put that in the residual bin, and you start to exaggerate the problem. So no, I don't think the public do realise the scale.
So we need to look for solutions here. We want to be positive. That's what we said at the beginning this morning. How do you, everyone here is probably an adopter in their own way, but there are gazillions of people out there who are not adopters, are in survival mode probably. Yeah. What is your recommendation then of how this needs to be addressed at the kind of pace that's needed to address the urgency of what has to be done? Because that patch is more than a patch, it's an enormous blob of plastic which is sitting in the Pacific, which none of us see, except if you're sailing around the world and you get caught in it all.
I think we need that financial nudge. So
hang on, a financial nudge. What's a financial nudge?
So it's about with plastics, plastic bags. There was a charge on having plastic bags in supermarkets, and so it pushed people towards reusable bags. So that was a financial nudge. It made people think about, actually, I don't want to keep spending money on all these plastic bags because plastic bags are bad. We've seen it on Blue Planet. So there's that financial nudge, and I think if we had that financial nudge in the right areas, it would encourage people to make the most sustainable choices.
I'm just going to press you on two words there, financial and nudge. What's the financial part of it? In other words, there's got to be a cost. That's what you're saying?
Yes. So the cost will be the deposit return scheme is one example of that. And that will be the nudge as well. People will be keen to get their money back. So they will take the plastic back to where they got it from and receive their deposit back.
But is a nudge definitive enough to make people do something?
I think it's a cultural change needed as well. So it's the start. The nudge is the beginning of the change.
I'm looking at Helen actually. Helen, you're there because actually you've got one of the new M&S bags. I haven't with me though. Oh, you haven't? Okay. Well, which is replaced a plastic bag, which is recyclable and yeah, and what do you mean lovely? Are you being nudged?
Yeah.
No, I say that because we've got to be practical. You know, this is something new. And Natasha, I see you nodding. Very, very.
I do. I even have my own shopping trolley. So I'm all on board with taking your own bags to the shops and not even driving, if possible.
What do you mean you have your own shopping trolley?
So I suppose, again, maybe a generational thing. You know, I went shopping with my grandma, always had a shopping trolley on wheels. So again, you know, it's not just about having the canvas bags, you can carry a little bit of shopping. It is doing your weekly shop and taking, you know, a whole big bag on wheels that's capable of carrying all of your tins, cans, bottles, you know, things like that.
Waste nerd off her trolley. Okay. I can see there's something developing here. But look, let's talk more broadly. We can laugh about it, but actually this is a very, very serious challenge because many are not adopting the circular economy in the way that we just heard in the previous session, for example. What's your view, Vianney, of how there's going to be this change, not in 10 or 15 years, but 10 or 15 months?
Yeah. Well, you need quick wins also. I think if you have examples of success, it creates the impression suddenly that it's feasible and you actually can make money out of it, and you can definitely align the objective and see that circularity is not against prosperity. When you talk about recycling, actually, sometimes you're just saving money for everyone. In our case, one of the components of the tire actually is carbon black coming from Russia, and it's extremely expensive. It's actually forbidden now to buy from them. So actually, you're solving a problem that goes beyond the ESG aspect. So you have quick wins here where suddenly the alignment of everyone is obvious because you're at the same time solving an environmental problem and saving money. So I think if you have quick wins at the industrial level on big topics, you know, and I always talk about big topics because it's there's a lot of things that we think are important and they're not that important, and the opposite is true also. I always use that example that there's 25,000 straws in a tire, you know, equivalent in weight. So, you know, even if we recycle 25,000 plastic straws into paper, it's equivalent to just saving one tire, you know. So you have to have the dimensions also, and the public perception very often is biased toward things that are very visible and very immediate, and you need to have those wins in areas that really make a difference, like a huge difference for the community.
If anyone wants to come in, please do, hands up and so on. Wow, there are a lot of people. Okay, we'll get the microphones to the two gentlemen there and here as well. But let me just check with Natasha and Stuart. Do you literally have to pick every factory off one by one, or every organization off one by one, in order to persuade them of the urgency of adapting their sewage, their effluent and everything else under the sun, and what's going out of the chimneys? Obviously, it depends on which factory. Do you have to pick them off one by one and convince them one by one? Or is there a culture which is developing, which is in your favor on this, Natasha?
So in my day-to-day work, I tend to engage at an organizational level. So that would be across, you know, whole, you know, waste management operators. But I would say that, you know, a lot of industry is already engaged and wanting to do better themselves.
And realizing.
Exactly. And they're driving, you know, government forward and saying, like, we've got the industrial carbon capture business models now for waste.
And actually, how do we change that? And can the government not have a department for climate literacy and understanding the root of these problems instead of trying to pick up the pieces? And you said about, you know, during the pandemic that recycling rates went up. If we always think about our lifestyles too, you know, we go to work, we go into the city, we pick up disposable coffee cups. We're so distracted from the time it takes to actually cook food at home. And our lifestyles just kind of are just built for waste. So it's kind of, how do we actually think about the way that we live in a way that would reduce the waste instead of having to pick up the pieces?
Yeah, that's underpinning the whole session. Again, Natasha and Stuart, particularly on this devolution and the financial nudge.
Yeah, happy to have a first go at those. So particularly on devolution, so yeah, as you said, waste is very much a devolved matter in the UK. So that means that, you know, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, you know, they set their own policy. I would say we're generally moving together. And when you're saying more about maybe, you know, regional devolution, I think it's the role of government, definitely, you know, we're definitely moving forward. And I suppose that's setting a minimum bar. There's no reason that regions like, you know, Liverpool City region, Manchester, they can't go above and beyond that and set their own. But I think it's definitely worthwhile the government being there and setting that key direction and saying, actually, you have to do at least this. And then I suppose on the question around corporates and encouraging corporates and businesses to engage and giving them financial nudges, we do have something in the UK called the plastic packaging tax, where if you don't have at least 30% recycled content in the packaging that you're putting on the market, you have to pay a tax on that. And that includes imported packaging as well. So it's all packaging on the UK market. And therefore that is driving demand for recycled content to go into packaging. So that's very much one at business level. And then on the last question, you know, I would very much love to see more closed loop recycling come forward, having more, you know, even at consumer level, like refillables. You know, often people try and buy in bulk to avoid this, but it's not, you know, always possible or convenient. So yeah, I would love to encourage more closed loop recycling and support businesses there.
Stuart, for those of you who are not familiar, there was in number 10 something called a nudge unit for the civil service. I don't know how you grade nudging, but there is a form of grading for nudging. Stuart.
I love the fact that my word nudge has been picked up on so much, but
it shows how powerful this platform is.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even think about the word, to be honest. And
It'll be on LinkedIn within an hour.
Wonderful. So to deal with the corporate driver, it's no coincidence that the recycling rate of commercial and industrial waste is much higher than that of household waste. And the reason for that is that the commercial sector have to pay for their waste to be collected, or they get some reimbursement back on the amount they recycle. So there's actually a financial incentive to recycle more in the industrial sector. But adopting a circular waste economy actually saves the business money. So that's the real nudge, that's the enabler. And it's a good commercial decision to make to do better with your resources and your consumption. But otherwise in the industry, I think it's a government industry, and when I say industry, I mean waste sector and the end users. So that could be the chemicals and manufacturing, the textile users industry. So there is a whole sector being built now where we're looking at waste to molecule. I mentioned this to Natasha before. So we're now moving away from waste to energy and now into a waste to molecule. So if we can turn waste resources back into the platform compound that we want to be able to manufacture that back up into products that we want, that can also help drive a new sector, a new industry. But what that really needs is people from the government to make it easier to achieve end of waste certification, so that product that you do produce from waste is recognised as a product.
Will government do that, do you think, Natasha?
It's definitely a work strand that I'm working on. So yeah, as I said, advocacy is very much part of my role. So end of waste is an issue that's been identified. So I'm talking with DEFRA and the Environment Agency to see if there are ways that we can do this better and make it easier to keep more materials in our circular economy.
Final question, we're out of time, but all three of you, where might we be in a year or two if we have this discussion again? Will we be saying it's getting worse and worse and worse? Or actually, rather like CFCs 40 years ago, we can see there is light, there is something developing, there is a change of public attitude. Vianney.
For me, it's definitely moving forward. It's almost impossible to go backwards now. Every piece goes in the right direction. The policies, corporations' attitude, public attitude, where basically we're saying that there was a period of 70 years during which humanity didn't recycle, but before that they were, and now they are again. So everything goes in the right direction. It's just the pace that's unknown, but the direction is known.
I think we're moving positively, and it's just evolving. It's just an evolution now, but it's always positive.
Natasha.
So I'll use my final moments to highlight an issue that hasn't really been spoken about so far. As everyone focuses on carbon emissions, another damaging one is methane emissions that comes from organics and food waste. Exactly, going to landfills and things like that. We know methane is several times more damaging. So definitely there's a lot more work to do in that space, as well as moving
But that was
forward with
acknowledged in
carbon emissions.
COP26.
Yes.
you know, specifically, and has been acknowledged, even though we talk about carbon all the time.
Yes.
What specifically has to be done about methane, apart from cows?
So I think there's a lot more we can do to capture it. So if it go, you know, if we have our food waste going to landfill, instead we can send that to anaerobic digestion facilities to capture that methane and then use it to power the gas grid. Because we know that, you know, maybe heat pumps aren't a solution for everyone right now, and hydrogen is, you know, a bit further down the line, but you can have biomethane immediately.
Are we anywhere near that?
So we do already have government programs, like in the UK, we have the Green Gas Support Scheme that gives you a guaranteed, you know, pence per kilowatt hour that you inject into the gas grid.
All right, well, I'm reluctant to bring this to an end, but thank you very much indeed. And there are probably other things we should have talked about, but I think we've given you a very clear impression that things are moving in the right direction, even if there's an enormity to the challenge, even if we're nudging, maybe we can do more than just nudge. Stuart, thanks for introducing that.
All right.
Natasha, Stuart and Vianney, thank you very much indeed. I'm staying up here because I'm introducing the next speaker.